Hello, everyone. Welcome in to 98.5 WJHI LP Jeffersonville, home of the Red Devil Network. Today is April the 13th at 1 o'clock. I'm Clay Abels, WJHI Sports Director, here with the Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools. New show, School Talk. Mark Loeffner, our Greater Clark County Superintendent. How are we doing today, sir?
Great. Thanks for having me again.
We have a special guest with us today. The Director of Elementary Education, Karen Wesley, is alongside us to talk a little bit about what's going on in the elementary school space. As we've spoken with Mr. Loeffner the last couple of weeks about what's going on with the high schoolers and middle schoolers. We're having Miss Wesley in. How are we doing today, Karen?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Certainly different times for everybody involved in education, things moving from in physical buildings to now things being done from home for students. Talk about Miss Wesley. What's the biggest challenge you guys have had to face thus far? Obviously, the pandemic coming out of nowhere, getting people caught off guard. What's been the most difficult challenge for you as the Director of Elementary Education?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for our elementary schools in general is the fact that our K through 5 students are far less able to work independently. Of course, the older you get, the students ease with being able to follow written directions and work independently without a parent or a caregiver being right there with them to help them understand everything increases. So especially for our K2 students, our teachers have really had to put their thinking caps on what types of assignments to give them, where parents can help them, and how to communicate those assignments. Most schools have done a packet pickup process where there are actual paper copies that the students and their parents can come and pick up using social distancing rules, of course. And even at that, there are, some obstacles to overcome in that some of our parents are still working. So, maybe they're with a caregiver during the day who may or may not be able to help them. And so then our working parents are helping our students at night with their e-learning. But our teachers were on duty, so to speak, earlier in the morning. I guess in a nutshell, our biggest issue is being able to give our kids the support they need when the home situation and who is with them all day may not be predictable.
For K through, as we mentioned, elementary school students, starting from the kindergarten level, doing packets, how does that work for them turning in the assignments and getting on schedule? I know with obviously the middle school and high school, they can turn things on through e-learning. How does the packet process work of doing the assignment and then turning it back in?
Well, our schools have a variety of ways that they are accepting the communication. And in fact, they really debated it out. We had a meeting amongst principals just to talk about what are some ideas that we have and ways that we can communicate. And every single idea, someone in the room, in the virtual room that is, could voice and say, well, I don't know that my parents all have a smartphone that can take a picture and text it. I don't know that all of my parents have a scanner at home where they could scan the packet, etc. So what we decided to do was we will accept that information any way that the parent can get it to us. So some schools are having buckets where they have paper packet drop-off options. Some teachers are just literally getting on the phone and making direct contact with the parent and going over information from the packet just to make sure that they received it and understood it, and get enough information to know that the students were able to attempt it at least. And then they are everything in between. If parents are able to take a picture of the assignment and email it to the teacher, they accept that. They are accepting it any way that the parent can get it to them.
For elementary students as well, the challenge of working from home, obviously a lot different. How do you communicate with parents and have them to ease their worries about staying on schedule and also, they're so used to getting into a building, doing 180 days of school. Now they're working from home. How do you keep parents at ease knowing that they're going to stay on track? Obviously, elementary school year is very imperative of building up your early math skills and English skills. How do you communicate with them and keep them on track, believing that working from home can still be very effective?
Well, that has been very individual. As you can imagine, every cohort of our grade levels in every building has a wide range of learning abilities. So some of our students are soaring through it with flying colors, and they feel like they're learning just as well as they would if they were in the classroom. And then we have students on a continuum all the way down to, they are really struggling, and parents will communicate with the teachers, and the teachers will make adaptations and try to meet them where they are. It's really, really individualized at this point, outside of what they're assigning to the whole staff or the whole class. If a student is struggling, the teacher's really having to make some adaptations.
I'm here with Karen Wesley, the Director of Elementary Education for Greater Clark County Schools, on April the 13th, speaking about the updates for the elementary education programs. One of the things that I talked with Mr. Loeffner about a few weeks ago was staying on a schedule. You know, students, very different right now, used to being in the building from 7:30 to 2:30. Now things have changed where they're having to work from home and they have different schedules. What advice would you give to parents and students that are at the elementary school level of keeping somewhat of a routine schedule, staying on track? Obviously, elementary kids, usually with a little bit shorter attention span, maybe having issues staying tight and inside the home. How would you advise parents and students to stay on a routine schedule?
Well, I think our schools have done an excellent job. Just about every one of them have published out a sample schedule that included a work time in the morning with a play break or a recreation break, and work time in the afternoon with a play or recreation break. I do think one of the mistakes that some of our parents have made with good intentions is, I think in their minds, they just want to knock it out. Let's take everything. We'll have this block of 2 to 3 hours where they just work straight through. And when parents have contacted me frustrated, especially with our K-2 students, because we did want them to have, a couple hours of work, because the typical day is 7.5 hours. So we don't want them to just have 30 minutes of work and then, they need to be practicing their skills. One of the questions I have asked is, are you just trying to push all the way through, or are you actually building in breaks? Because their little brains need the break. And honestly, we as adults need that break too, especially for those adults who've never had to teach their children before. So I would recommend setting up those time spans to have a little work time in the morning with some play added in, and a little work time in the afternoon with some play added in, just to give them the brain break they need.
And that's a great point, speaking about having physical activity, and that leads into my next question for both education and physical education is there any plans for summer programs, say if students are behind when it comes to their elementary school learning, where they maybe can do some tutoring in the summer? And also with that, is there any plans with trying to keep up with PE schedules and keeping kids physically active? Obviously very difficult to do right now during the pandemic.
Well, I'll answer the PE question first. Our PE teachers have been phenomenal. Many of them are videotaping themselves and recording workouts or suggested activities, and they are still very much assigning PE assignments. And just from the social media feedback I've received, I think that's the favorite activity of all the kids. They like doing that. And I also think it gives our parents a little window into the personalities of our teachers, getting to watch those videos. So that's been fun to kind of see unfold. The other part of your question, you're going to have to repeat for me. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Speaking about students and trying to learn from home, is there going to be any summer programs, say if a student is behind in elementary education, if they're trying to catch back up learning from home? Is there any plans for summer education?
Yes, sorry about that. We are at the mercy of waiting to see how this unfolds. Dr. McCormick, our state superintendent, has not come out and said what our guidance is, and she has basically said we're at the mercy of seeing how the curve flattens. But she has told us, as a school district, or all school districts, be thinking of a backup virtual plan in case this extends into summer. So what that told us was that it's likely to extend, but at the same time, we don't know. Come mid-May, maybe the curve drops and they start lifting restrictions. We do know that we are getting some federal dollars to help with regression. And so I can imagine that if we can't do anything this summer, that we'll at least have a program that we can run in the fall. But we have yet to brainstorm the logistics and the criteria for all of that, just because it's still unfolding.
As we get, it seems weird with the scheduling changes that it's actually close to the end of the school year with how things have worked out here on April the 13th. How do students that are at the elementary level and their parents get ready for registration of next year? Are things still planned to be on schedule with that, or how are things going to work from a registration process?
Well, with our registration process, we have kickstarted it. Actually, we ended up opening the window early because a lot of our parents are working from home, and we sent out the SNAP code letters for our 1st through 11th grade, K through 11th grade students. They all received their SNAP code letters, and we were starting to get emails saying, hey, the window doesn't open until mid-April. I'm home with nothing to do right now. And so we went ahead and opened our window early. So you can get online right now and register for the 2021 school year. If you have a kindergarten student, if they're they have to be 5 on or before August 1st to be able to start in kindergarten. You would register as a new student. But our current kindergarten students all the way up through 11th grade would register using the current student button. But you can get on today.
What would you tell students and parents during this time, the benefits of online education? Greater Clark really ahead of the curve with their e-learning, and also, as we mentioned, for the elementary students doing packet work at home. How does Greater Clark in a good position for elementary students to benefit from at-home learning?
Well, Greater Clark was in a good position in that we had initiated e-learning. We had 2 days during the first semester where our students were at school, but they were pretending, so to speak, that they were at home just so that our teachers could train the technology piece and then say, oh, okay, pretend I'm not here. Let's communicate electronically and all that kind of stuff. They were able to practice that twice in the first semester. And then luck would have it, we ended up having an unplanned day due to weather that we ended up having an e-learning day. And so we got to experience one where it was a last minute call, which was good. It was a learning experience. And then a couple weeks later, we were able to have a planned e-learning day to make up for a day that we had to take off in November. And since we knew that one was coming, teachers had planned a little differently for that one. So I feel like we were blessed to have run that full experience of learning. And honestly, it was professional development. What it looks like when you're planning on the fly because we had a snowstorm come through or something like that is going to feel very different than when you know since the beginning of the school year that a day is going to be e-learning, that teachers are going to plan differently. So both of those experiences helped them, but I will say, and I know Mr. Loeffner agrees, the e-learning in the way that we implemented it was never meant to be this long-term plan. And in our hearts, there is no way e-learning can replace the face-to-face teaching of a teacher, and we realize that. What we've asked our teachers to do is much like what Dr. McCormick told us to do. Take what they knew from March 19th and build upon that. And so right now it's going to be hard to teach a bunch of brand new material, but we are asking our parents to practice with them at home on skills and pieces of knowledge that we don't want them to regress on since they don't have their teacher with them every day. And that is a blessing of e-learning. I cannot imagine if this had been in the 80s when we didn't have the technology and we just didn't see our kids, we didn't interact with them, we had no way of knowing whether they were still out there or not. It's a blessing that in this unprecedented time that we actually have a way to keep in touch with them.
Last question for you, Ms. Wesley, is what is the number one thing you want to communicate to the parents and students at the elementary level during this time? What's the number one thing that you would like to get across to them here today on April the 13th, 1 o'clock on WJHI?
I think the entire Greater Clark cabinet, instructional cabinet, operations cabinet, we all hope that our staff, our students, and our parents hear us say, you're doing the best you can, and that's okay. This is not meant to be a perfect time in our learning. It's meant to be just a bridge between now and when we'll see you again. And as long as you're attempting and you're trying, you're doing it right.
Thank you, Ms. Wesley. That is Karen Wesley, the Director of Elementary Education for Greater Clark County Schools. Thank you for coming in with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Karen Wesley, the Director of Greater Clark County Elementary Education. I'm Clay Abels here now. We're going to speak with Mr. Loeffner, the Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools. Mr. Loeffner, every week we meet, seems like more updates from time to time, things changing, very fluid, as we mentioned when the first time we met. To start off with, can you give us a quick update? I know we have a school board meeting coming around the corner, and what's the latest from the last time we spoke on Monday on April the 6th?
Yes, this week, there are no e-learning lessons going on this week. We'll start e-learning again next week on Monday. We do have a school board meeting tomorrow night, Tuesday night, at 7 o'clock regular time. It'll be our first attempt at doing the meeting remotely. We're going to have our board president physically in attendance, Janelle Fitzpatrick, and then our other board members are going to Zoom in remotely to do the meeting. So there'll be about 5 people, in the boardroom, and we'll all social distance and try to get through this meeting. remotely, and we do have several action items to discuss and the board to vote on. So we're looking forward to it. Like I said in our previous discussions, we want to keep things moving forward, whether it be personnel items or action items in terms of facility projects. So we're trying to keep moving forward, preparing for next year, and just keep things going.
Here with Mark Loeffner on April the 13th, 1 o'clock, Director of Greater Clark County Schools, our Superintendent, here on School Talk. And this week's edition, we're going to do a lot of questions from the students of Greater Clark County Schools on what are some of their feelings and things that they want to discuss. So, Mr. Loeffner, we'll start off with the first question we have from our Greater Clark County students is, will there be any summer sports or practice involving, obviously the spring sports season is off the table. What's the latest when it comes to summer sports and the plans for practice as we go into the off season?
Well, I wish I had a good answer to that. We're really awaiting guidance from the IHSAA, Governor Holcomb, Dr. McCormick, Superintendent of Public Instruction. So, we're waiting for their guidance on what we can and can't do. As of right now, we really don't know, to be honest with you, what's going to happen with that.
And the other question, students, that was at the top of the list wanting to be answered is locker access. Obviously, tough for students right now to get back into the building with the e-learning being at home and the schools being more shut down than usual. What's the updated information on students to come back if they have materials in their lockers to get to?
Yeah, we're hoping once Governor Holcomb releases some of the restrictions in terms of stay-at-home orders and things of that nature, we realize we're still going to have to do some social distancing and manage how many kids come in, but we're hoping sometime in May to set up a schedule where maybe we do it by alphabet, where certain letters of the alphabet come in, get their belongings, and then leave the school. And then each afternoon or after all the students leave, we have our custodians clean real well so the next group can come in the next day. And we'd do that over, a 6, 7, 8 day period so that everybody could come in. But we want to make sure we don't get too many people in the buildings. We want to do that social distancing and really decrease the number. But we are working on a plan. We're just sort of waiting on the governor to ease some of those restrictions, and we will have a plan that we'll put out, via social media and our website, for students to come in and get their things at some point.
Along those same lines, students with being in the school is maybe something they can do outside of the school is lunch account money. What's the best course of action for students if they want to have a refund for their lunch account money or they need to access that? What's the guidelines and progress in that area? Yeah,
we haven't really gone in depth with that in terms of discussions. We'll let our school treasurers take care of that issue. My thinking would be that if you're a student that's going to return to us, and return to your same school, go ahead and probably leave that money in your account. It'll carry over to next year. If you're a senior, obviously, you would want to get a refund through your school treasurer. Or if you're leaving the district for some reason, you'd want to get a refund, and the school treasurer would make sure that happens. You would just have to make sure you communicate with the school treasurer and your principal to make sure you get those things done.
This is a question from one of our seniors in the Greater Clark County school system is, will seniors still get cap and gown? I know there's still plans to do graduation at the moment. Are cap and gowns still planned to be distributed, or is there a process for refunding? What's the latest in that?
Yeah, we're still trying to get more information from those various companies that do the cap and gowns. As of right now, we're sort of in a holding pattern. As you know, our graduation dates are that second week of June. If we're able to have graduation, and the governor, eases some of the restrictions and we can somehow figure out a way to have a physical graduation in our buildings, then we'll do that. If not, what we're hearing is that the companies will refund those costs in terms of the caps and gowns. And really, we're just waiting to see what the governor puts out, in terms, and the superintendent of public instruction, Dr. McCormick. We obviously want to do something for our seniors, and we're just not sure what that's going to look like yet.
For incoming seniors, planning on things for next year. Senior rings, another question asked from one of our upcoming juniors in Greater Clark County schools. Is there plans to distribute senior rings, or is that similar to what we're talking about with cap and gown? It's more of a wait and see process.
Yeah, we're in wait and see mode on that right now, just to see when we can get people back together. Even in the buildings, to hand those things out while still doing some social distancing and managing that piece of it also. So we're in wait and see in terms of that.
For next year's schedule, obviously, we have the planned dates at the moment for graduation and things going forward. Is next year's school schedule still on plan for start date as usual, or is there some discussions to move the start date? What is your plans for students coming back next year on start time?
We have had no discussions on changing the start date. Now, obviously, once again, if Governor Holcomb or the superintendent of public instruction, Dr. McCormick, asks us to adjust that, move it back some or something like that, then we'll look at it. As of right now, though, we plan on starting the school year as the calendar dictates right now. One thing we are going to look at is the Labor Day weekend. We had an e-learning day and a professional development day in there in that Labor Day weekend area, and because the Kentucky Derby is now going to be during that time period, we may adjust the calendar around that Labor Day area in terms of Oaks Day and what being off, but we'll make sure we communicate that to all our community. But we are going to take a hard look at that in terms of adjusting the calendar around that Labor Day weekend.
An interesting question from one of our Greater Clark County students is sanitation. Obviously, with the changes in the COVID-19, moving from social distancing to being at home, and obviously it looks like we're going to have a much different world around us all outside of school systems and including for the future. Is what sanitation requirements is Greater Clark County Schools discussing for changes? Will hand sanitizer be available in classes now? What's the change potentially in sanitation whenever school is back in session in physical buildings?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to really sit down as a cabinet, and address those things. One of the things we've looked at, and we've met with a couple different companies, are having a couple different companies. They've presented what they could do for us in terms of deep cleaning schools, filters and things like that. That we're really digging into that information and what we can do with that. Obviously, right now, with the stay-at-home order, our custodians, are staying at home like everyone else. But once that stay-at-home order is lifted, we're going to make sure the custodians get in the buildings and do some really deep cleaning and continue to do that, when staff come in or students come in, and make sure that we're doing the right thing there. But we have met with some companies on what we can do with some really deep cleaning with the filters and things like that.
For students going forward, whether they're seniors or inside the high school level, dual credit, obviously something that's very important to them. Will dual credit scores still count from this year, and what is the plans going forward on dual credit classes? Obviously, with things changing to e-learning, it makes it a little bit different for the students at the high school level. What's the plan with dual credit?
Yes. What we're hearing is, especially through Ivy Tech, who's our biggest early college partner for our high schools, is that as long as the students are doing the work and staying with their professors, whether it's a professor on loan or it's switched over to online, they're going to be able to get that dual credit as long as they finish the class, just like a student would do at University of Louisville or IUS. So it's important that our high school students that are in dual credit courses, for them to do the work, make sure they submit the assignments on time, and make sure they engage with their professors and stay on top of things. So, our understanding from Ivy Tech and IU through the ACP programs is that they'll be able to get that dual credit as long as they do the work and engage in the process. AP-wise, students, they're going to be able to take the AP exams at home. Obviously, they're going to have to get the required score to get the credits through the university they want to go to. So, the big change there is that they're going to have to take the exam at home. But I think the College Board and the AP exams, they have eased the restrictions in terms of time and how much time they have to take the exams and things of that nature. So I think they're working with the students pretty well.
Here with Mark Loeffner, the superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools. Another episode of School Talk as we're speaking on April the 13th at 1 o'clock, the latest going on with Greater Clark County Schools, and also discussing this week student edition questions. We're having students send in questions and send them over to Mr. Loeffner. Another question that goes down the line of scheduling for students is, one of the questions came in was, why did we go back to a 2-week spring break? And they were trying to figure out for scheduling next year the 2-week spring break and how all the scheduling changes came about.
Yep. Well, probably the biggest reason for the change was Prosser. We wanted to make sure our schedule and calendar aligned with Prosser. We didn't want our students to be out of school and miss days at Prosser. It impacts so many things in terms of their grades, their work-based learning, job shadowing experiences, things like that. So that was probably the biggest reason, was just to make sure we align with Prosser, because we have quite a few students that go to Prosser. And the other thing, with balanced calendar, we did some surveys with staff, parents. The majority wanted to go back to that balanced calendar. So we made the decision to do that. We feel like it'll work well. It aligns us with Prosser. And so we're going to see how that goes for this coming year or next year, and we feel like it'll be a positive change.
Another question from one of our students is, how will we do Chromebook collection and redistribution? What's the plans for Chromebooks?
Yep, that'll be another thing. What we did last year is we allowed our students to keep the Chromebooks unless you were a senior. So probably what we will do is that same thing. We're going to have to work out a schedule where we collect Chromebooks from our seniors. Now, we won't do that until after May 15th, after all e-learning's done and completed. Then we'll work out a schedule to where our seniors will come by their schools and drop off their Chromebooks once they complete their work.
This is an interesting question from one of the students, is describe year one in one word as the superintendent. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about one of the questions students have with your past experiences, but they wanted to know, if you had to describe your first year in one word, what would it be?
Crazy. It's been wild. I've enjoyed it, because I will say the group of people I work with, at the administration building, the cabinet are great to work with, and they're all problem solvers and critical thinkers, and their number one priority is students, so I've enjoyed everything. I've enjoyed working with our board, and I think we're doing some positive things, but it's been pretty wild and crazy. I will say that.
For students, one of the questions they asked, and this is kind of one that they said more down the road, but what happens if this carries into next year with school schedules? Is there any backup plans, or is it? I know obviously Greater Clark in a great situation with e-learning if it has to get to that point, but that's one of the questions. Obviously, it's way down the road, but is there any potential plans that might be discussed if this changes the start time for next year?
We've discussed it a little bit. We've put no formal plans together. We're hoping that doesn't happen, because it's one thing to jump into e-learning while the school year's already going on and schedules are set, students know who their teachers are. It's a whole nother thing to start a year out that way. So we're hoping that doesn't happen. But we will have a plan in place, by midsummer, if it is looking like it's going to happen, or if school's going to be delayed. The challenges are, getting schedules out to students, getting teachers, engaged with their new students, and getting students engaged with their new teachers. That'll be the big challenge, and getting that e-learning process going with a new teacher, new student scenario. So we hope that's not the case. We hope that we get to go back to school physically.
What is, another student question in here is, what is the number one thing you're concentrating on while school's out? Obviously, you have a lot of things on your plate, but what's number one on the list?
Well, right now, is just making sure our students are taken care of educationally, with technology, keeping the learning going, food service, those type things. Now, behind the scenes, our cabinet, we're working on staffing, personnel, planning for next year, facility type things. Like I said earlier, we're trying to keep those things going. Right now, we just posted about 20 job positions, teaching positions, last Tuesday and Wednesday. So, now we have to figure out, all right, how are we going to interview those people and hire those people remotely, and thankfully we have the technology where we can do interviews through Zoom and Google Hangout and those type of things. But, those things are still moving forward. We're trying to get ready for next year, and it's important that we do that.
Here with Mark Loeffner, Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, on April the 13th, 1 o'clock, School Talk, speaking on the latest in Greater Clark County Schools. We had the Director of Elementary Education, Karen Wesley, in a few minutes ago to talk about the elementary level, and now we're getting some student questions over to Mr. Loeffner. The last question for you, Mr. Loeffner, from the students is, what are your past experiences in education? Students interested on how you got into education, how you moved your way up into the superintendent spot. Talk a little bit about how you got to this position today and what got you into education.
Yep. Well, I like to tell people if it wasn't for high school athletics or just being involved in athletics, I probably wouldn't be in this position. I grew up in a real small town in central Indiana, north of Indianapolis, called Michigantown, Indiana. It has one blinking light. And through athletics, I was able to get a scholarship, to play baseball. Played a couple years of junior college, and then went to Purdue University. Graduated from Purdue University with a social studies education degree, and then ended up moving down to South Florida and taught at a very big high school in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and coached football, coached baseball down there. Had a great experience. Moved back here to Indiana, ended up going over to Clarksville High School and teaching and coaching there for a year, and then got involved in administration. My first administrative job was an assistant principal job at Clarksville Middle School for 3 years, and then I jumped over to Parkview Middle School, where I was the principal for 7 years, and then obviously went out to Charlestown High School as the principal for 7 years. So, and then into this role as superintendent. So I have had a pretty diverse background in terms of small schools, large schools, very diverse schools. I've enjoyed each of those stops or experiences. And really my reason for getting into education is I like just to see students grow as individuals and then see what they achieve, once they become adults, and help them along that path. As superintendent now, I can do that on a wider scale, which is really neat, and work with people to do that on a large scale. So, for me, I wouldn't change a thing, in terms of a lot of people in today's world, are telling younger people not to get an education, not to be teachers. I wouldn't have changed a thing. I'm glad I got into education. I'm glad I became a teacher. I'm thankful for the experiences I had coaching. I still miss those experiences. I would love to coach if I could, but in the superintendent role, I don't think I can do that anymore. So that's my background, and it's all been enjoyable. The 26 years I've been involved in education, it's been very enjoyable.
That is Mark Loeffner, the superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools. Student edition this week of School Talk, having them send in questions, talking about everything from schedule changes to students getting back into the building to potentially access their lockers to Mr. Loeffner's career in education. We'll have more episodes coming up every Monday. Today on April the 13th, this is with Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, Mark Loeffner. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Loeffner. And another update, as you said, Tuesday, a school board meeting on April the 14th. We'll have some more updates coming back next week. And then if they have any questions, whether parents or students, they can go to any of the social media websites and access information there. Thank you, Mr. Loeffner, for coming in today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That is the superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, Mark Loeffner. I'm Clay Abels. This is recorded on April 13th at 1 o'clock. School Talk, another edition with the superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, Mark Loeffner. Thank you for tuning in to 98.5 WJHI, LP Jeffersonville, and streaming on WJHI.com, along with on television on cable TV digital 184. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.